But anyway, I am Matt Murphy. Nice to be here today. So I've been in the venture business for a little bit over 20 years, 15 years at Kleiner Perkins, 5 years at Menlo Ventures, investing in SaaS for the better part of the last 15 years. AI has really come to the forefront of SaaS investing in that last 5 years. And I'd say there's really three things we look for. There's either kind of an AI first company where the SaaS company wouldn't exist without the AI. So a good example of that is a company called Hover, where you take 6 pictures with your iPhone and it creates a perfect 3D model of any structure. And that is used by the construction and insurance industry to basically allow people to figure out amount of siding, damage to a building, things of that nature. So people don't need to get up on ladders and measure and things like that are more dangerous. The other one is, second one would be kind of AI assisted SaaS companies. So that'd be things like Harness, which is a CD company which pushes code into production, and they have something called continuous verification where they monitor the system post deployment. So a lot of companies basically use AI to augment or supplement or make their application better. And so that would be the second category. And then the third would be AI platforms, which is Clarifai. So companies that essentially allow many other apps, SaaS companies, et cetera, to accelerate their initiatives around AI or to make their application much, much better by leveraging a third-party platform versus doing it on their own.
And hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm Zavindar. I'm a partner at Lux Capital. Have been in venture not quite the 2 decades that Matt mentioned, but coming up on 7 or 8 years at this point for me now. We invest broadly, so not just software, but generally deep tech and emerging tech. And we looked at artificial intelligence, deep learning, ML, way back in 2014, and really circled that as as a technology that was emerging, that after a few maybe false starts in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, was really ready to have its come to Jesus, so to speak, moment and mature in a way that would be applicable broadly across enterprise. When we think about ML and AI, not wholly dissimilar from Matt, we will on one hand look at vertical applications that leverage what's possible now. Those tend to be intersectional for us. So machine learning applied to biotech, computer vision applied to construction, as Matt just kind of alluded to, and then broadly horizontal. Clarifai is I think a brilliant example of exactly that. Hugging Face is another company, coincidentally also based in New York, doing natural language processing as a platform. So those are our two platform plays. But I'm reminded on a daily basis 2 things about this space broadly. One is just how powerful it will be and just how disruptive it will be across every industry and across every workflow, but also just how early we are in the evangelization and distribution of these technologies. So that's that's really what excites me.
That's great. Thanks, guys. So I guess first question I'll pass off to Matt. Matt, how have you seen AI change over the past few cycles?
Sure. I mean, I think AI started out as like algorithms. Algorithms were really considered AI to help people do better shopping and things like that. And I think it's evolved from algorithms to really true machine learning, deep learning, and things like that, where a system gets smarter and learns itself. So I think that's probably maybe the biggest technical change in terms of how people are adopting it. But I'd say the main thing that's changed in the industry is that people now recognize that AI is really a competitive differentiator, and in fact, a competitive a competitive disadvantage if you don't have it and use it, because your competitors certainly will. So it's become kind of something that was used by a subset of companies to now really most every company saying AI is going to help me look at my data, process things better, and differentiate from my competitors, and or just make better decisions within the company. Data's there, and the question is, how do you harness the power of that data? And that's really what AI has evolved to across most applications is let's figure out how to mine that data and use it to help our users get smarter and help the application become more valuable.
If I could take a stab too, I would say, again, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, it was a decade ago, it was a winning strategy to digitize and push your business to the cloud. And today it is a losing strategy if you're not doing that.
Right.
5 years ago, it was a winning strategy to make interoperable your data and apply machine learning over it in some capacity. And today, it's no longer just a winning strategy, but in fact, it's a losing strategy to not apply machine learning on top of your data in some capacity, independent of what type of business you are, independent of how big your business is. And the best kind of analogy I can have for the audience here is, at least at Lux, where we invest, in pretty early stage companies that are, in their most embryonic phases a lot of the time. 5 or 6 years ago, maybe once a month we would get a quote unquote machine learning or AI company, and all of the partners would kind of joke about it and say, oh, it's machine learning yet again or whatever. And at this point, independent of what the business is, they will be deploying ML. Every company we see that walks through our doors has some mention of ML, or may not even mention it anymore, but will deploy it and leverage it in some capacity. So it's the default assumption for the most nascent but technologically mature or sophisticated companies, and it's table stakes, I'd say, in competitive industries today.
Great.
I'll just add to that. I think that's really spot on. It's become a corporate mandate. It's now up at the CEO level in the company. Like, what are we doing with AI? And so that's kind of driving a bunch of behavior in companies. And there are a lot of companies that just frankly don't have the talent or expertise. And there are a lot of kind of very crude platforms out there. But I think what a lot of the industry is looking for is what kind of platform can help me deploy AI and use it to our advantage more quickly. And that's where a platform like Clarifai can really come in, and some of the other ones that Zav mentioned.
So I'd love to get you, speaking of platforms, how important do you think it is to have a platform for a company's AI strategy? I'll give that to Zavin, who's I went to Matt first.
It's important. It's incredibly non-trivial to get it right. And because AI and ML in particular, so much so, is only applicable if you have data on a centralized or interoperable, normalized data platform that's available across the organization. ML and AI tend to then sit on top of those platforms that are the actual data lakes or systems of record, so to speak, for the companies. What we see today is the larger cloud providers who have become those systems of record, or who have become the data lakes, the Googles, the Azures, the AWS clouds of the world, attempting to use machine learning as a carrot to get larger enterprise clients signed up onto their cloud, but really using it as a carrot to then lock in customers into large and egregious bills over time for the data lakes. So I would say two things. One, it's not only important to have ML as a platform that sits on top of whatever data lake or system of record your business uses, but ideally you want a decoupling of church and state to provide you a business autonomy to be able to make decisions that are best for your own budget, but then also clearly decipher the data system and the system of record versus the analytical system.
Great. Matt?
Yeah. I think it depends on the situation. I mean, there's certainly companies that are AI first and have that in their DNA, and they're smart and savvy enough to build kind of their core differentiation themselves around AI. But there is a much, much larger part of the market that are companies that are bolting AI on later. And I think those companies oftentimes don't have AI teams in their DNA. and they're trying to figure out what to do. Replicating it would take too long. They wouldn't do it as well. There's economies of scale in AI platforms because they see so many different use cases so many times that they're able to outpace DIY or do it yourself dramatically on a cost, on a performance, and just on an efficacy basis. So I think platforms really come in for those somewhat, for sure, somewhat those after the fact use cases of like, okay, now we've got this data or we've got this app. What can we really do to make it better? And let's use this platform so we can really get a jump start on solving that problem. I think Michael's frozen.
We might have frozen.
Yeah,
Mike. Let's give him a second here.
All right, he's coming back. Did you catch all that, Michael?
Sorry about that. I caught most of it. Unfortunately, I got a little garbled on my end. My internet's not as good as I thought for some reason today. So that being said, another question for you guys: what challenges and opportunities do you guys anticipate seeing in the current environment? And Matt, I'll pass this off to you.
When you say challenges in the environment around companies using AI or
exactly companies using AI, you said earlier, I thought it was a great point about, it wasn't their DNA initially, they tried to bolt it on, companies that are either starting out with it or companies that are trying to bolt on, what challenges are they seeing with being able to implement AI?
Yeah, well, sometimes they don't even know what the starting point is. I think they know the problem statement, but kind of. Sorry, I accidentally hit my mute button. That's not good.
Nope.
I was saying they know the problem, but they need to be breadcrumbed in terms of how to solve the problem. And there's a lot of very primitive open source technologies or platforms out there, but it's very hard. They don't know how to use that. So it's like, well, that's great. And if I had a team who was really proficient in building that out, that'd be fine. Or if I had the time. So I think some of the problems are, how do you look at different, more discrete problems and find a platform that solves that better for you? So some of the stuff that Clarifai is talking about in facial recognition or in the tagging domain, where it's really more of a fully built solution so that somebody can just load their data in the model and make that an extension of their application. Because I think there is unquestionably a massive demand for people, for ideas out there that could make applications better, but so often it's really about connecting those dots and how to actually get it done. So I think platforms have on them a bit of the responsibility to make it easy for those use cases to happen. And I think that's where there's just a lot of issues in the industry around a lot of the capabilities being great for a super technical person and accelerating them, not so great for a team that's trying to come up the curve quickly.
I would add, I think Matt really properly kind of alluded to it a few minutes ago, where there's, across industry, a top-down pressure from executives, from boards to kind of, come to them with an explanation of what their machine learning or what their AI strategy is going to be. And so often there's a very wide gap between, okay, we have kind of top-down buy-in and top-down budgetary kind of discretion to go and deploy ML and AI, and what do we actually use it for? How do we actually kind of get it into a state that it's driving value for the business? And crossing that chasm, isn't only, we developed an algorithm or wrote a piece of code, but it's really understanding what the key KPIs, what a win would look like, a quarter or two down the line. It's understanding where you're going to get that data. It's understanding how you're going to label that data to train machine learning or the AI. And then finally, it's how do you get a model on top of that that sits consistently in any workflow that you want it to be in. And that's why, I do think, especially for the companies which make up the 99.9% of companies in America that don't have machine learning, talent in-house, that haven't built their own custom clouds. It's so important to be able to find platforms that are simple, usable, and have point solutions for every step of that process. Right. But we're still, again, it's if anyone in the audience is feeling a little bit of frustration grappling with those problems, you're not alone, because the vast majority of executives, I think, in America are feeling a little bit of exactly that. But it's rapidly, the friction to deploying ML is rapidly decreasing. So it's an exciting time in the market because of that too.
That's great. I'll tell you, I really like you guys are thinking through this. We obviously recognize some of the problems and some of the opportunities here, but what industries in particular do you think would most benefit from AI and the state of where AI is today? And Zan, I'll send this over to you.
Frankly, it's harder for me to think of an industry that wouldn't benefit from AI or ML.
100% agree. Everyone should
the industry, maybe where I have the most familiarity with, and what I tend to get the most excited about today, financial services and financial tech, just because those industries tend to be so quantitative in nature. They're used to building statistical models, but maybe they haven't developed the machinery or the real-time data interoperability to have ML or AI real-time models sitting in those workflows. So that's one. The other is biotech and pharma, which for so long has kind of seen almost a cultural wall between the biologists, the chemists, and then the machine learning engineers or the mathematicians and statisticians. And so crossing that wall, I think there's not only, and I think this ends up being true in most industries, so often, it's not just the technological, cost of adoption, but it's also the cultural cost of adoption. But getting those right, I think ends up driving inordinate value. And, I think 10 years from now, financial services, we're already seeing this right now with the development of the Plaids and the Stripes of the world. But financial tech and financial services and biopharma will look radically different 10 years from now, based on the maturation and development of ML and AI.
Yeah, I think Zav stated some good ones. I think around fintech, I think more just broadly around that, it's companies that have large data sets where some kind of quantitative analysis can give them an edge. So can you underwrite better? Can you take risk better? Things of that nature. So we've got a company called Signified, which approves more transaction in the checkout chain by helping the retailer understand the risk of both fraud and the person's ability to pay, or something like Upstart that approves loans at a much higher rate with a much lower interest rate, than banks. There's that. Pharma's massive. Zav knows this better than I do, but we at Menlo restarted our life sciences practice about 5 years ago, and everything we've done there is really at the intersection of AI and life science data sets. So how do you get out of test tubes and white lab coats and have the computer really identify which compounds and formulas are best suited to address a particular target, tumor, cancer, whatever it may be. So that's been huge, but it's really so much broader than that. I mean, we talked a little bit about construction, but we have 2 AI investments in construction. The one I mentioned, Hover, and then a second one is called Open Space, which is a camera that a foreman wears, walks around the site. It creates time series data on everything that's happened on the construction site over time. So you can go back and say, oh, before that drywall was deployed, was everything in the pipes and the wires and all that. So it helps reduce a lot of, fraud, rework, change orders, just a bunch of stuff. So there's so many random use cases out there of AI that make applications better. And some, again, wouldn't exist without the AI, and others are just so much better. But that's what it's exciting about it right now, is it's almost limitless around where it applies. And I think the companies that are most creative in terms of how to apply it to their business and how broadly to apply it to their business will really be advantaged in the market by far.
That's great. That's great. So obviously there's a lot of different companies, a lot of industries that can benefit from AI. To focus a bit on Clarifai itself, and I'd love to get your guys' view. And for example, what new products that Clarifai is producing are you most excited about? Do you think there's that's really gonna be a great fit with the market? And Matt, I'll put that to you.
Well, first I would direct everyone to Matt's talk from this morning, and then they'll hear about it a lot more than what Zab and I can share. But that was pretty exciting. But we talked about this notion of going from being a generic platform, of which many are out there, to kind of connecting the dots and creating more of a full solution. So the labeling as a service product, some of what Clarifai is doing in NLP, and then really we continue to be very strong in government as well, and some of that's more bespoke, but the underlying capabilities are very reusable. So I think Clarifai mainly is taking this approach that a platform needs to be very easy to consume by its end audience, and that's really where we continue to build the more user layer and features that I think will get more of those applications onboarded and up to speed more quickly.
Right.
I think one of the things we've done really well at Clarifai is not get lost in the at least to an engineer or a computer scientist, the potentially seductive nature of the mathematics or algorithms, but really think long and hard around how do we decrease friction to use? How do we create the best user interfaces? How do we actually have empathy with the end customer and realize, exactly where they're coming from, and the pain points that they will run into in deploying and developing their own AI and ML in-house. So because of that, I get really excited about the labeler product. I think it's a great example of something that's not, that's not super sexy. You won't win technology awards for it per se, but getting it right and then having it fit into the workflow of the broader platform, I think is so powerful, and I think it really differentiates us. And I know we just launched it, so I think we're still in the early cycles of even telling the customers potentially here today about it. But I think that'll be a great differentiator for us. And so I think just it's not a single product, but it's carrying that customer first lens and empathy, and really kind of not overcomplicating unnecessarily what ultimately should be a very easy to use product that makes everybody's life easier.
I'm really glad you said that's something we do think about on a daily basis, is the end customer and making it as easy to use as possible. And I'm glad you both said labeler and labeling as a service, something I'm working closely on. And I will say this, I think some of the stuff that Matt talked about today and then some of the features that will be coming out soon, fingers crossed on an engineering award on that one. I think it's really an amazing product. So keeping on the Clarifai theme here, have to. How do you guys think a company like Clarifai to compete with the tech giants? I mean, we are a independent AI company focused solely on AI, and our biggest competitors are a little different than us, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. So what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think somewhat already talked about it. It's really this maniacal focus on this opportunity, focus on customer needs and pain points. I think if you're a big cloud provider, it's one of N things that you provide, and you're never that close to the customer. It's just kind of adjunct to what you're doing. We wake up every day with a mission and focus to go find the most significant use cases of AI out there and help our customers solve those problems more quickly. So I think that alone is a huge differentiator. And then all the things we've already talked about making it more consumable for a mass audience to more easily integrate into their applications and things of that nature.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think we're lucky in that we can play Switzerland a little bit, right? We don't force our customers to lock into any cloud. And so not only can we be myopic in nature in our focus on AI and ML and AI and ML only, not one of N various initiatives that a Google or an Amazon or a Microsoft might have going on, but we allow our customers greater flexibility, right? So ideally we have better products coupled with greater flexibility, not just in the particular domain of the product themselves, but in terms of how they fit into the broader technology stack that our customers deploy. So it really does feel to me like a win-win. And I think when it's all said and done, the cloud providers and the analytics or machine learning providers will be cleanly decoupled.
That's great. That's great. And so, last question on the Clarifai theme. what do you guys think are the biggest opportunities for Clarifai? I mean, obviously there's a lot, AI can be used across different industries, great products and a great platform. But what do you think, what areas do you think are the biggest opportunities? And I do have to ask this since we're going to have our board meeting in a little bit. I want to make sure we're doing the right stuff.
Aligned.
So Zavin, I'll send it over to you.
I want to save something for Matt too, but I get really excited about our, again, kind of the self-serve, ease of use products that we have available directly from clarifai.com. I think that's unique, that's rare. And again, we're so early in the adoption cycle. I think we're going to look back at that and say that right where we are today really was the beginning of that proverbial hockey stick. And then, of course, historically, this has always been true across industry, which is, whenever emergent, sufficiently mature tech really does come to bear, it's so often the government and defense guys and gals who kind of pick it up first. And I think we're seeing that here in spades today. It does, as Matt alluded to, tend to be a little bit more bespoke in nature. But as we develop those one-off products, I think that gives us line of sight in terms of how to generalize it in a way that broader enterprise will adopt down the line once they're ready to make that decision. So self-serve and I guess government.
Yeah, I mean, I think our opportunity is to make the whole application economy or ecosystem better and smarter. Like we went through this wave, as Zav already said earlier, of digitizing all these workflows. And by the way, there's still so many that need to be digitized. And the more of those workflows that are digitized, there's more opportunity to use AI on top of that. So it's hard for me to focus on any one area. I think that's really the opportunity for Clarifai. Think about that broad mission and then understand specific pain points. Some will be horizontal and some will be vertical by industry. And how do we continue to serve those industries better by understanding their needs and building that for a set of customers instead of just something generic. So if it's the retail sector, we know the top three issues and pain points in the retail sector for computer vision or AI in general. So how do we think about continuing to package things like that more deeply across various industries?
It's great. I appreciate that. It's good thoughts on what we should be including in our board deck and doing and executing going forward. So if we're going to hand it over to Q&A to the audience, but I have to ask one last question. If I don't ask this, I'll not doing my job. We talked a bit about it, but I have to go a bit deeper. What is the state of venture capital? We have a fourth guest on as well now. So Zavin, I'll pass that off to you, as I think Matt's a little busy with his dog. So again, venture capital and AI. What's the state right now?
It's hot. I think venture as an asset class right now is wildly frothy and hot, and frankly, I think most financial asset classes are. It's not just venture; it's growth equity, it's public equity. At this point, so it all trickles down, and where we sit in venture, which is the earliest, most embryonic stage, and ultimately or historically has been the smallest pools of capital. We say small, but in the big scheme of things, there's on the order of tens of billions of dry powder that various venture firms, Menlo and Lux. Menlo just I think 2 weeks ago or a week ago announced their most recent funds, which were north of $1 billion. So congrats on that, Matt. There's so much dry powder to be put to work. I think the venture ecosystem has been observing now for many decades this trend towards digitization, and the next obvious step is towards analytics, machine learning, AI, computer vision, natural language processing, etc. So it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. It's a great time to be a company builder. It's a great time to be in this ecosystem because we are lucky to have a support system and an ecosystem that's very supportive of enabling and galvanizing and supporting these companies from the earliest stages on. It's a great, I will say as a venture investor on my side, it's never been more competitive. So, a great time for the entrepreneurs. we'll see how Matt and I duke it out over the coming years here.
We only collaborate, Zav, but I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is kind of crazy, and against the backdrop of COVID, like we all went kind of into this lull for a couple months in April and May, and then things came back out hard charging and through the roof. And this is, in my over 20 years, I swear this is literally the most competitive time I've ever seen. And so why? Yes, there's a huge amount of capital out there. There's massive kind of markups both in the private markets and liquidity events in the public markets that that reinforce all this. But I think it's also underlying all that really is just a massive acceleration and shift to digital. And then, as we've already said, it's really, how do you take advantage of digital workflows and data sets? And that's what's going on. The other thing is, as you look at AI and venture, and I think Zav said something like this earlier, but used to be like, oh, we're an AI company. Everyone was calling themselves an AI company, and they weren't really. They just used AI. Small subset were. But AI is now kind of like mobile. It's just an expectation. It's not like its own standalone category often. It's just like, if you're not doing AI, well, then what's wrong with you? So I think we always kind of look at like, okay, what is this company's plan to use AI to get better over time? And are they credible? If they built a team early on that knows how to do this, or are they talking to someone like Clarifai, and that's part of their strategy around how they win?
That's great. I love it, especially that last part. They should definitely talk to Clarifai about how to win. So I'll open this up, guys. I really appreciate this. Great answer to this question. I'm gonna open up to the audience. You already got some great questions in there right now. So first one, and I'll send this over to you, Matt. What is the most important thing a company should focus on while it's scaling?
Really team. And I mean, I think you just can't overstate that like the thing that makes companies grow better and more effectively is having the right team for the right stage of the company. And sometimes that can be very different early on, where you need scrappy people who can kind of crack that first code. And then there's people who are better at scaling an organization, hiring, managing people, creating systematic ways of doing things. So, that to me is, the number one thing. I think second to that, oftentimes companies get a little bit complacent. It's something's working and they just focus only on that, and they're not thinking about other disruptors in the market, either a market disruptor, a competitor, or something adjacent that they should be doing before someone adjacent comes into their market. So I think that kind of strategic foresight is super important, and not all companies are as good as that as they should be.
Sure. Zav, any other thoughts on that?
No, focus, prioritization. Building a company is, it's constant firefighting, and unless you know what fires to be putting out at what times, and that comes obviously, to Matt's point, with the right talent. And with the ability to kind of see beyond the curve and continue to disrupt, I think the meta abstraction for me is just kind of rank ordering the priorities and knowing how and where and why to spend your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next question we got, I talked a bit about COVID and how that impacts venture capital. But any other thoughts, Zav, on that, or do you think that's it's a bit of a weird time indeed? So
it's a weird time, and again, we're seeing this even in the broader indices. The technology companies were well positioned in a way that unfortunately the broader economy wasn't. And given where we sit in venture, which tends to be kind of the most sophisticated or avant-garde technology leaning progressive companies, VC and early stage companies have fared well on a relative basis. So I think we're seeing that in spades.
Okay. Matt, anything to add to that? Or,
No, I think I talked about that enough earlier. It was a hiccup, and everybody's come back guns blazing.
So the next one we got is, so what do you think? Do you think it's worth a small, micro to medium companies to focus on internal solutions and building that capacity, as opposed to external cloud services and maybe Clarifai? I'll leave that to you, Matt.
Oh, well, it depends, right? So I think there is oftentimes like something just so specific where a company has the expertise around it. Maybe like some of the things Dev and I have talked about in life sciences, where it might be a little bit too complicated to use someone else's platform, and they have a team that's been kind of building the solution from the ground up around, the company wouldn't exist without it. So I think there are those kind of things that maybe that are core to the company, and then there's many more that are okay beyond that. Where else can we apply this to get an advantage and do things better? So I think that's the way I would kind of bifurcate it between the do it yourself and use a platform.
I would say the inevitable and undeniable trend is towards using what others have already built. And
Yeah.
Frankly, it doesn't even matter the level of technological sophistication your company has. Like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, the MLAI companies that really were, hiring, the leading researchers, the leading postdocs, the leading PhDs in the world, were writing everything from scratch. I think Clarifai is a great example of a company that, built from scratch the entire MLCV platform. But today, even those companies are using off-the-shelf open source libraries, toolkits that have been built for this. So attempting, I think we'll look back at ML and AI and attempting to write your own custom in-house ML and AI platform or toolkits will be akin to writing your own databases from scratch. Nobody does that. Those are increasingly so solved problems, and focusing your time and attention elsewhere. Again, even talking about the worries for growth stage companies, it's not a better mousetrap for an ML model, but there are so many higher order points of focus that our companies ought be focusing on.
Great. So this is a bit of a broader question. I think is about venture capital in general and raising funds. But what should founders think about when presenting to potential investors? And I'm assuming you guys have seen 1 or 2 pitches in your day. Matt, I'll send it to you first.
Okay, well that is quite broad, probably intentionally, but I think we're always looking for like how acute is this problem, and how well does that person who's bringing forward the plan or the idea, why are they differentiated or distinguished to go after that opportunity? There's kind of product market fit, and then there's founder product fit, and so I think the starting point is finding a pain point big enough and a founder who's really credible to say, I'm going to be able to solve this better than anyone else. Beyond things like that, obviously you want somebody who understands the industry they're going into well, that you believe would be a great entrepreneur, who's going to be able to hire extremely well, build, scale, all those kind of things. I think that, founders also have to have this kind of tenacity, and that is, sometimes it's hard to read that, sometimes it's obvious from things they've done in the past, and sometimes it's not. But being a founder, being a CEO is super hard. It can be everything from lonely to difficult. You go through days where you think you're going to fail, you think you're going to win, and you have to have somebody who can grind through that to success. So I think oftentimes, we're looking for that kind of that kind of specialness in a person, especially at the earliest stage. At a later stage, then a lot of it is about your metrics, so forth, your product roadmap, and how this gets really, really big. And certainly some of that applies at the early stage. But I was focusing more on kind of that foundational part of a company when it's about some of those other things.
That's great. Zao, what have you seen? What's important when you speak with founders?
Like the obvious is, are these people good company builders? Do they have the skill sets required to recruit, to understand the market, to understand their products? Is there not only product market fit, but founder product fit and founder market fit? So that equilateral triangle, so to speak. But I think where we see founders or entrepreneurs struggle is having empathy in terms of not having done their diligence before speaking to us, and that's a good proxy of will they do their diligence when they talk to future customers, future employees, future partners. So just understanding, okay, what is this venture investor looking for? What is their background? What does their portfolio look like? How does what I'm building fit into that kind of thesis or that narrative? How do I best fine-tune the vocabulary that I'm using to describe my business into a language that I think that they will immediately understand. And that's non-trivial and requires probably 2 hours of work before every, half an hour of actual, one-on-one interaction. But the founders and the fundraisers who do that really well, I think that's one of the highest order, rate of return practices that any entrepreneur can do.
That's great. That's great. I tell you guys, really appreciate it. I think that was our last question from the audience. If anyone else has one, you can just click on the QA at the top right.
There is one, Michael. There's a couple. I'm not sure we've got time for them both, but there are a couple if you see on the.
Oh, in the chat section. I was looking at. Oh, perfect. All right, great. So first off, it looks like, well, this is obviously a good and timely one. We only got a couple weeks left to the election. So global economy, a lot of changes, and particularly the political landscape, potentially a lot of changes. What do you guys think? How's that going to impact AI? How's that going to impact venture capital? And Zavin, I'll send that off to you.
I'm always a little bit puzzled when any macro or political events change our day-to-day strategy. We invest at the seed, Series A, Series B, at the really early stages of the company, and then we tend to hold these companies for 7, 8, 9, 10 years at a time. So having any macro event, even macro cycles tend to be 4 to 5 years. Political cycles are 4 years. I think it'll be interesting. I, like probably most Americans, am watching the news and paying attention to what's going to happen on November 3rd. But in terms of our day-to-day and our operations, I don't expect there to be any significant change.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I don't, if anything, irrespective of the election, I think we've got other factors that are driving the use of ML that won't be impacted by that. I think we're just people are moving faster and faster to innovation, and all this distributed people not in the same place is a more profound factor driving that than the election.
Good. Yeah, I think we're all feeling that. I know I certainly am, and you want the internet connection. So guys, I really appreciate help on this. Appreciate you joining. I appreciate your thoughts, and all the audience members. I appreciate the questions. Excellent questions, all. And it's going to end about 1 minute early, but Matt and Zavin, I just want to say thank you again.
Thanks. Good to be a part of it.
Yeah.
Go Clarifai.
Yep. Bye bye, everybody.
All right. Bye bye.